First, I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. We know your time is precious, and we want to share with you some good ideas that hopefully will inspire some thinking outside the box. I think the best way to introduce this topic, empowering brands and consumers to share personal data, is to tell you that 4 years ago, neither my team nor I ever envisioned that we would be involved in the personal data economy. We were researching the concerns and needs of affluent consumers as related to privacy. But what we found was there was an entire ecosystem comprised of nonprofit organizations like the Need to Be Alliance. There were governmental organizations, of course. The Europeans were leading, of course, in GDPR and privacy legislation. And we also found dozens of entrepreneurs who were creating interesting business models. And as private investors, we began to do our due diligence. The result of all of that journey is what I'm going to share with you today. There's more to the journey. This is probably only the beginning, but I hope that it will be interesting and enlightening for you. It'll give you a different perspective. And I would also ask you to take a look at it with two lenses. One is the lens of you as a human being with loved ones, and how do you feel about your personal data and your personal data rights? And the second is, of course, as an executive, and how do you feel about how you're going to gain access to that data, that precious personal data, as we go through digital transformation. So now, let's take the journey. We have a fundamental belief that all human beings have data rights, not just privacy rights, but personal data rights, and that they deserve data dignity. That is, they need to be able to have control over their personal data. The interesting fact that Gartner gives us is by 2023, 2/3 of the world's population is going to have their personal information, their personal data covered under modern privacy regulations, GDPR, CCPA. You see a lot of states in the United States creating privacy laws. We believe federal legislation, according to our sources in Washington, will come by mid-2022, early 2023. But that will be up from 10% today. We see Singapore, Brazil, many other countries creating privacy legislation. What we discovered on that journey 3 years ago and up to now is that personal data rights and dignity extend far beyond privacy legislation, that there's another entire world that makes up personal data rights. And that's what I want to share with you, some of that today. Now, I think we all agree, it's been said that personal data is the oil of the digital economy. We like to use the term the lifeblood, but none of those analogies are really very good. Oil pollutes, oil is exhausted, personal data is not. We like to think of lifeblood because not only is personal data the lifeblood of the digital economy for corporations, but more importantly, perhaps as a human being, it really is what drives the enhancements and improvements that we're going to see in our lives in healthcare, in finance, in lifestyle over the next decades. Now, there's a personal data industry. And you can see from that diagram that that personal data industry is comprised of many companies we know and respect. Adobe, Oracle, McKinsey, Salesforce. But what we found when we did this diagram is that the consumer was nowhere to be seen in this diagram, and yet the consumer is at the center of this industry. It's the fastest growing industry in the world. We see an estimate down there of 52 billion, but we believe that's highly under-quantified, underestimated. Unfortunately today, but that's changing dramatically, most of the data that's traded is being accessed unethically. That is, we're coercing people into giving us that data, or in many cases, illegally. We're scraping data, we're using data in ways that are not really legal, but we wink at it and we say it's okay. But the compliant consumer data utilization touches every brand, every marketer, every data provider, and yes, every human being. So it's a critical industry, and we believe it will be one of the most important industries going forward. Now, we know that brands need relevant, rich, timely customer data in order to fulfill that promise of true customer centricity and personalization. I credit a company called DigiMe for this slide, but what data has to be is accurate, authentic, direct from the original source, i.e. the consumer, and validated by that consumer, not third-party data or inference data. There's a recent study that says that third-party data, companies that sell third-party data, provide data that is only 50% accurate, often because it's just wrong or because it's old, it's dated, it's no longer relevant. The data has to be multidimensional. That is, we have to have many different dimensions of what my friend Richard Witt calls your live streams, your medical data. Let's look at personalized healthcare. If we're ever going to achieve the dream of personalized healthcare, we're going to need your genetic data. We're going to need your historical records and today's records, of course. We're going to need your dietetic information, your Fitbit or your exercise information. We may even need everything that you've written in your emails, online, etc., so we can gauge your mental health. Now, we can choose not to participate in that, but if we really want the benefits of personalized data, those are some of the kinds of data put together in multiple dimensions that we're going to have to provide access to. I didn't say sell it, I said provide access to, under our control. We also need historical data. So maybe you've been on Facebook for 10 years. That's a lot of data. But at the same time, we're going to need real-time data. Maybe we need your location to be able to identify where you are for safety reasons, or to provide you an offer, or to just help you navigate to your next destination. So the data has to be longitudinal. Most importantly, I think the data has to be normalized. I used to run CRM for Citibank, and 25% of our data was not usable. And by the way, we got that data directly from the clients, right? And we also found that that data was in different silos, in different structures, in the checking account server or the auto loan server, and so that we couldn't connect that data. It wasn't in a structured format to facilitate instant, easy analysis. These are all the attributes that data is going to have in order for companies to really fulfill the promise of customer centricity and personalization. Now, this is a summary, a distillation of what we see and hear in all the surveys that are out over the last 2 years. The headline is consumers are confused and angry. First, there's a low awareness, maybe 10 to 20% of consumers around the world are aware that they own their Facebook, Google, Twitter, and all other collected data. I often ask executives, senior executives that, even digital executives, and they are not aware that consumers own their data. So it's a relatively new concept, but consumers are becoming more and more aware of that. Consumers feel in many surveys that their personal data is being coerced, that they're being talked into, forced to provide that perpetual license to platforms in order to be able to do search, to participate in social media, to be able to have access to the app. That is being co-opted, and that the freemium products or the value of the products that they're getting is going to serve the interests of other parties. And they know that because of the valuations of Apple, Google, Facebook, etc., the market valuations. And they see that, wow, the profitability and the market valuations are going somewhere else. They're not serving me whatsoever, or in a very small way. They also feel, very importantly, through Cambridge Analytica and other cases, that the surveillance economy is violating the individual privacy and threatens the security of their loved ones. The most recent example is a study conducted by the Me2Be Alliance that says that approximately 60%, I believe the number is 60%, of your school apps, the apps that your kids use from the school, are leaking information to third parties. Unheard of and maybe even illegal, but that's the fact. I have a 15-year-old boy, and that concerns me a great deal. The other piece of the puzzle is personalization. So consumers, when you ask them, are you getting relevant ads? They say, no, I'm getting mostly irrelevant, intrusive ads and offers. And that's why my response rates are so low. But there's another part of it, which is programmatic advertising. There was a study conducted recently that said that if you want to target in programmatic one attribute, say gender, the chances of getting that right to target the right person with the right offer at the right time are 40%. You could roll dice and get a better result. Now you want two attributes, gender and age. The chances of getting that performance is 24%. And if you want to try for three attributes, gender, age, and income, the chances of really hitting the targeted advertising, are only 2%. So there's another factor there. We won't go into here, but it's not working. All that surveillance capitalism, all that tracking is not working anyway. And the last point, I think the most important, and we saw that with the pipeline hacking that caused everybody to go and hoard gas over the last couple of weeks, is that cyber criminals and scammers are winning the digital wars, and that is affecting how we live. It's not just hypothetical. It's not just happening online. We are affected physically in our lives daily by what's happening in cyber crime. And yet, and this is important to remember, and I want to say, so recently we saw, I don't know if you saw the data that 95% of consumers in iOS, Apple, have not opted in to be tracked. So you could draw the conclusion that, hey, people don't want to share data. And those are some of the conclusions that are being shared. But that's not the case. In the surveys that have been conducted over the last year, obviously we had COVID, so a lot of surveys stopped asking questions. The majority of consumers, especially millennials and Gen Zs, are willing to share data, but there's one major caveat: with brands they trust. 61% in the Smart Communications survey, 57% in the Accenture survey, and we conducted a survey at the end of 2019 where 55% of the global affluent, the top 10% in the top 10 major luxury markets, were willing to share data with brands they trust and when they're assured of control, security, and privacy. So sharing data and privacy are not opposing objectives. They can work together beautifully. And that's what I think needs to be reiterated over and over to people. Now, we also recently conducted a survey with the top 10 business school in the United States that you would know. The vast majority of those young, highly educated graduate and undergraduate students were unaware that they owned their data, their Facebook data. 83% were not aware. But when they realized that they owned their data and asked several questions after they become aware, 87% said, yeah, brands should pay me with incentives for the use of my data. And yes, I'd be willing to share some or all of my Facebook data for brand rewards, but only if I retain control of my data. So educated people are willing to share because they know they get benefits out of it, like the example I gave you in healthcare. There are many other ways that we benefit from sharing data, but it has to be under the right circumstances. So how do we empower consumers and brands to share that personal data? I'm going to share the business model of one of my investments, and I will caveat by saying that I don't believe this will be the only personal data exchange. I think there will be medical data exchanges. So for example, when you provide your genetic data through saliva to 23andMe and to Ancestry, you pay them, they give you your profile, and then they turn around and sell your data over and over and over to labs and pharma for billions and billions of dollars. We think there will be exchanges that will represent consumers with their medical data and other types of data. What we're doing here is talking about consumer data and consumer goods and services companies sharing that data. So let me share the opportunity by giving you a little context. Consumer platform data, that is Google, Facebook data that has been aggregated about many, many consumers, I think it's 2.3 billion for Facebook, has become the world's most valuable asset. We know that from the valuations of these companies and their profits. But little value has been provided back to the consumers, the data creators. It's as if a songwriter gave away all of their songs, Kanye West, they would not gain anything or very little value from something that they produced. At the same time, brands and advertisers today have no access to this data. When you advertise on Google or Facebook, they give you a little sliver of data through an API, but they give you a crumb compared to the data that is available. That data essentially has been monopolized by consumer, social, and e-commerce platforms. That's the state of the world today. But there's one clause in GDPR, the European law, and CCPA, and will be probably a common clause in all privacy legislation across the world. It's called data portability. In GDPR, it's clause number 20. That clause says that you as a consumer, since you do own your data, have the right to data portability and mobility. You can take possession of that data and do whatever you want with it. You can delete it, You can keep it on your computer, or you can do something else with it. But up to now, there's been nothing else that you could do with it. There was no place for you to monetize your data. So consumers can take legal control of their data, and the digital platforms are enabling this, by the way. Google has something called Google Takeout, where you can literally get your data, and it's pretty easy to download to your device. But up to now, no one had developed a marketplace that had the legal and the technological capabilities to empower what we call a viable personal data economy until now. So I'm going to share data from one of my investments. You can assume that the core principles that I'm sharing will probably prevail. There are no guarantees that any one company is going to dominate or even survive this marketplace, but I want to share with you a concept. So think of the NASDAQ of personal data. This is what this company, DataLucent Exchange, is trying to do. It's trying to empower consumers to download to their device, computer as well, and then take control of their data from the digital platforms, from Google, Facebook, Amazon, Instagram, etc. To then have a process for copywriting it, the way that Kanye, the way that Jay-Z, Taylor Swift can copyright their works, a writer can do the same. And once that asset is copyrighted, they can license it to brands that they trust, and this is critical, that they trust, in exchange for fair value rewards. So think of free room nights from the Ritz-Carlton, discounts from a restaurant chain, events, in being invited to the Gucci annual fashion show. And the objective, of course, is personalization. And this exchange, the DataLucent Exchange, is built to GDPR and CCPA standards. So let's emphasize again that the privacy compliance is table stakes. The future of data will be that it will be covered under privacy legislation. But the commerce, the economy that is going to fuel the personal data economy, the digital transformation, the digital economy, whatever we call it, that relies on other laws. So for DataLucent, the consumer data sources that they have been able to map so that the consumers can download it through their device and provide it on the server to brands is Facebook, Google, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Amazon, and Apple. Some of these companies make it really easy, like Google, for you to download your data and take control. Other companies are still making it hard. And I don't think they ever envisioned, when they were hoarding the data and aggregating the data on your behalf, on my behalf, that we would ever be able to take control of that data. So that's a paradigm shift. And that's a change that I think the platforms are still getting used to. They thought that, okay, you can download your data. What are you going to do with it? Probably nothing. Or you can exchange data. We can have, for example, in the UK, have open banking. I can take my data from Citibank and share it with Barclays. But I don't think the platforms ever envisioned that anybody would ever empower consumers to do this, or it would be a long time away. I was talking to someone from the platforms this morning who said, we thought somebody would do this, but we didn't think it would be so quickly. And I will tell you that as an investor, I thought somebody would do this, but I thought it would be 10 years away. Now, this is a sample of someone who's given us consent. That's a very sliver of a sample, a tiny sliver of their Instagram data. And you can see that you can get a lot of demographics and you can get metadata. That is, since all the platforms have run their machine learning on each and every individual's data, they've been able to classify it, summarize it, segment it, create, dare I say, a profile about you that is extremely rich and about what your interests are, right? So these are the interests of this individual. And by the way, these are the sentiments that they have surmised, right or wrong, about what this person is like. Now, when you get even more granular, you can see that there's a lot of data for brands to be able to use and use to serve the interests of their customers, not to exploit them. And I want to reiterate that. So you can see here, for example, that this person recently viewed an Ulla Johnson Acadia dress in Shopbop and went to Amazon, the drop, and looked at a particular product and looked at a sculpted cable bracelet from David Yurman. That's the kind of data that we can use to make predictions, to make recommendations that are far higher probability of being accepted purchased by the consumer. Now, let's walk through how an exchange, a personal data exchange works. This happens to be the DLX ecosystem, and it is unique, but we can imagine that in the future, there'll be even more possibilities to how data is shared between consumers and brands. But let's walk through it, and I'll take my little arrow. Let's start with ethical brands. Nordstrom, Tiffany, Robert Mondavi, Rolex, Estee Lauder, Delta, Carnival, BMW. They have customer bases. So they will take 100,000 of their customers and do a test. And they will stand an offer, a reward. Let's say it's Ritz-Carlton isn't here, but let's say it's Ritz-Carlton. And they say, dear customers, 100,000 of you, we will provide you a reward if you will allow us access to your Facebook data or your Instagram data. And then consumers decide whether they like the offer. So the exchange doesn't create the pricing. It's just like a loyalty program. I make you an offer and then you accept it or not. Our experience is that 7% to 10% of your customers in the initial phases will accept that offer. And what will they do? They will download the data to their device to the mechanisms that are offered by the platforms and create a copyrighted and licensed asset out of that data. And they will automatically, by consent, upload it into a secure personal data store that belongs only to them. The data is not combined. My data and Katie's data are not combined in one file. And that's for two reasons. Security. So we're trying to mimic what the future of decentralized edge AI data will be. But at the same time, it's to give you, the individual, full control of your data, legally and beyond legally, ethically, using your not only copyright law, but licensing law. So you're making a little individual contract with each one of these brands to provide them data. And the data can go in their server if you consent, or the data can be analyzed right here in this server. And what brands get are actionable insights. Think of the way we conduct research today. We do it in surveys. Imagine that with 100 times better and more data. That's behavioral data, not reported data. And so how are brands going to use this? Well, brands, so there's two, let's say there's two virtuous cycles. The first cycle is I give you a reward as a brand and you as an individual provide me with data. The second more important virtuous cycle is that I'm going to provide you with product innovations, benefits. I'm going to give you custom content, not mass or spam. I'm going to give you personalized offers. And as a result, you as a consumer will give the brand greater loyalty, not only by exchanging your data, but by making purchases, providing higher spend, recency, frequency, monetary value. And hopefully, if you've earned that right, they will give you the referrals. This is a way to build relationships with brands and brands to build relationships with consumers that give you lifetime value in an entire new dimension of data sharing. So to summarize, the brands get actionable consumer insights, hopefully they'll use to create innovations and new products, content, offers. To segments, we're not going to go one-to-one marketing yet because we only have the data of 5,000, 10,000 people, but we can use that data to create segments that are predictive. So we can do predictive advertising, we can do predictive modeling, we can have better predictions and recommendations that consumers are likely to accept. So this takes our marketing to a much higher dimension. And the consumers on the other side now have the ability to control and to license that data to up to hundreds of brands that they trust. And remember, brands are not known for exploiting consumers' data or taking advantage because they can't afford to. They need to create value. So the consumers can trust these brands, Procter & Gamble, Colgate toothpaste, Robert Mondavi wine, you name it, the brands that they love and trust with data. And they receive rewards and personalization in exchange. We think this is the future. Whoever does it, in this case, DataLucent, we believe this is the future of personal data sharing. There will be lots of iterations. There will be lots of evolutions. Hopefully, there'll be lots of innovations. But think of this, and we'll share the slides with you. Think of this as the virtuous cycles that are being created through personal data sharing. Now, there's a legal framework that goes with this, and I want to go through it fairly quickly. But I want to reiterate, it's not only about privacy data. Privacy data is table stakes, the same way that driving laws are table stakes. But the destinations and the distances that we go are empowered by something else, right? Human creativity. In this case, that human creativity will be protected by copyright and licensing laws. And so this DataLucent exchange, of course, has to meet all the privacy standards. All the systems, all the technology, all the workflows have to be privacy by design. Privacy has to be injected into every part of the process. And of course, it has to be designed to meet the privacy laws as they keep evolving. And the technology does aggregate the data, but your data, and it keeps it separate, encrypts it, filters out your medical data, any intimate references that you have, your photos. We have to keep out the things that are not necessary for brands to have. And do that as you're uploading your data, not afterwards. And all of the communications have to be transparent. You have to opt in, and everything has to be by consent. And we're automating that for you. But you still have to know that what you're doing is licensing your data, and that these are legal agreements, and that you are in control. So consent compliance is fully automated, and you can audit all of it. Those are the minimum standards, right? And of course, you have to meet GDPR's 8 fundamental rights. So let's say that I license my data to a brand that I love, Xenia, but then I decide I want to erase my data. I want you to forget me and erase me. The platform and the brand automatically have to have the technology to do that in a split second. And in this case, this technology platform does. But I want to also emphasize that there's a 2-step process that empowers consumers. So as soon as I make an active choice to download my data to the device that I own, I take possession. And that vests ownership immediately. It allows me as a consumer to assemble a valuable compilation of licensable digital assets. That is why we need a 2-step process. I need to get out from under the terms of service of the platforms because they are very onerous. Once I take possession of my data, I can do whatever I want with my data, which includes never sharing it with anyone. That's my right. Sharing it in a limited way, or licensing big amounts of it for rewards and benefits. But I have to be able to trust the people. So not only do I trust them, but I'm legally protected by privacy law, copyright law, and licensing law. And of course, therefore, I gain legal standing. Now, I'm going to finish out by saying that the platform, DLX, tries to mimic what will be the future, which is decentralized AI. And here we are, here's my device. And my device is the brains of my entire life, if you will, besides this brain. So it'll provide data. All the data will be aggregated on my device. And of course, it will be backed up to the cloud. The cloud will never disappear. I can't just have all my data on my device and it's lost to my phone. But what we'll have is privacy, reliability. It'll be almost in real time, and it'll make efficient use of what's happening. So the algorithms are going to come into my device by consent, calculate the credit score and never touch my data, provide me an offer from the brand I love and never touch my data. That's the future. And as we get more, I was listening to a podcast on IoT the other day, and we will have so many sensors in our homes, in our offices, and maybe on our bodies that we will be tracked 24/7. So the long-term future of personal data sharing is important. It's edge AI, it's IoT, but we believe, and we're passionate about this, that it will all be under full control of each individual, represented by lawyers, fiduciaries that keep us safe, even from ourselves. So that's what we see as the future. In summary, I will say that the future of legal, ethical, secure, privacy compliant, and fair value, and this is important, fair value personal data sharing is bright. And that fortunately, because of companies like DataLucent, the future is available right now. Now, I'd like to open it up to questions, comments. I want you to please give me as candid a dialogue as you would like or not. So question number 1, do you envision consumers using blockchain or NFTs to capture their data, token size it, and use it as currency? The answer is yes. I believe that blockchain, as it becomes more mature, and even NFTs, will become very valuable assets of consumers. It's their creation. And I do believe that some will use tokens, but I also believe that it's nice to have your free room nights or even to get cash. So I don't think that tokens will be one size fits all. I mean, think of cryptocurrencies today. Cryptocurrencies, Elon Musk just decided that Bitcoin is not going to be used to buy his cars. Why? Because one day it might be worth $85,000. And tomorrow, if I use Bitcoin, I might have to pay $150,000 or $20,000. So in order for something to be used as a currency, as a store of value, it must be stable. So the NFT part, blockchain capturing their data, absolutely. The tokens, I think we need to evolve more, but there's no question in my mind that the future does belong there. So any other questions? It says this concept is well explained by Me2B Alliance. Yes, agree. There's an entity called Me2B Alliance. I don't think there's a great, wonderful group of super bright, I would say, luminaries who are members. I don't think we all agree on, some people don't think that consumers are smart enough to be able to negotiate on behalf of themselves for their data. We think that that's why consumers can buy homes and can buy insurance with the help of fiduciaries and representatives. And in the DLX exchange, we have that representation, legal representation. Some people think that you cannot serve two masters at the same time. I would refer them to the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ and the Paris Bourse. They seem to have managed to be able to empower and enable both investors and public companies to trade and to be able to represent their interests through regulation and through just common sense and ethics. Any other questions? Let me go to the Q&A. Will parents consume their kids' driving data on the family car? I think that's a possibility. Maybe the parents don't need to have all the raw data, obviously, but maybe some key insights as to what those their kids are doing, where they're going, where are they. And I'll give you an interesting story before I answer the second half of the question, which it says that insurance companies appear to be geared up to do so. Generation Z seems to be willing to share their data with their tribe very, very openly. My kid and his cohorts share their location data. My generation doesn't do that. We think it's taboo. They do not. They have different values and they place different importance on different things. So I think that's not only looking at it as a human being, but a generational human being helps you to predict the future. There are many things that our parents did not see as possible. I don't want to name all the societal changes that exist today that we thought were not only illegal, but terrible. And then today they exist as the norm. So I think that that will be an evolution. I think as far as insurance companies doing this, they should have to do it with our consent. And there should be some protections of not only of privacy, but of pricing. There are companies that are using algorithms. This is documented. I won't name the company. And the regulators have approved it that will say, you know what, Milton Pedraza is not very price sensitive. Let's gouge him. And this person who is more price sensitive, let's give them the good deals. Meanwhile, I'm the client who've been there for 20 years. So I don't think that's exactly fair. And I think we're going to have to establish not only laws, but ethics around the data that we track, that we're allowed to track, and how we use it. Right now, insurance companies and auto companies assume that they own the data. I think that will change over time. And I think particularly the brands will come to realize that they need to be in a partnership with consumers. Next question. Can you envision a new commerce evolving where individuals give control of the data to a business entity that manages their account to achieve personal goals? Yes, I do. I think that will be one of the iterations of this evolving personal data economy. Much like turning over the management of your retirement accounts to a financial institute. Yes, I do think that will happen. And here's something that I think is interesting. Right now, your money, all your money, unless you are hoarding cash, but most of us are not, is either in some investment institution, some wealth management firm, or your bank. And you are not panicking as far as I can see right now. Why? Because there is regulation, and then there's trust and other means of keeping them honest. I'm not convinced that my bank is serving my interest right now because the offers they send me are pretty, let's say, ineffective, inappropriate. Let's just say they're lame, right? But I know they're not likely to steal my money. And when I write a check or I do a transfer, it is going to happen. So I think that's the level of, those are the kinds of parameters we need to create around those types of entities that you've described so that we can have the same confidence in one of our greatest assets. And I believe we'll earn tens of thousands of dollars a year. And that's our personal data. Excuse me. We know that Facebook wasn't happy with the iOS update that required specific permission for it to track users on their devices. Correct. At least they said that. But now one of the benefits is that because all the data is in Facebook and everybody else, all the apps aren't tracking you anymore, a lot of advertisers are going directly to Facebook to advertise. So, you know, there's some issues there that probably need to be dealt in a separate webinar. But I would say that while Facebook took a short-term hit, Facebook, Google now eliminating cookies, brands may decide they're the only options in which to advertise, and particularly small businesses. So let's see if it's a negative or a positive. And of course, Apple is not allowing anyone to track you, but they are tracking you. They're keeping all your data, and they're creating an advertising model that where they're going to generate revenues. Amazon is doing the same thing with your data. So let's see whether they're winners or losers. But I think long-term, the consumers are going to be big winners alongside the platforms, if the platforms are allowed to live the way they live now. So the question follows up and says, so I wonder how bought in big tech is in general to consumers taking more control over and reaping value from their personal data. And I would say that question will be answered. I can tell you that DataLucent experienced something where one of the platforms did not allow it to advertise on its platform that you could have access, that you own your personal data, and that you can have a benefit, financial benefit of your personal data. But the law is clear. So whether companies like it or not, whether the platforms like it or not, that's the law. And the law is not likely to be overturned because GDPR, CCPA, et cetera, are going to stand, and we'll have federal legislation. So I can tell you that there are some platforms that do believe that this will take the pressure off of them, that the more that personal data exchanges and other data intermediaries, infomediaries prevail and give consumers an opportunity to monetize their data, that will take the pressure off of the monopolistic themes that are roaming around in Washington and that threaten them. So I think many of them see this as a safety valve. Any more questions? I think we may be running out of time. Well, we still have a few minutes, but in that case, I will, if we don't have any more questions, let me.
Milton, we do have one more question. In the scenario that DLX manages to successfully launch legally compliant operation supported by governments and majority of users, what would happen if all digital majors come up directly or indirectly with a similar solution?
Then either DLX will be acquired or DLX will die. That's entrepreneurship, you know? But do I believe that we will have fulfilled our mission of empowering consumers? Yes. And are we participating in other potential ways to empower data and consumers? Yes. As an entrepreneur, you need to be clear-eyed and open-minded about what will happen. If the platforms become marketplaces for consumers to monetize their data, then that will transform the business model completely. I believe that the technology and the patents that DLX has will still be valuable, but that's my optimistic belief. But do I believe then that we will open up the personal data economy to fulfill its potential and give us personalized healthcare, personalized money management, personalized lifestyles? Yes, I do. And that will be enough for me, at least personally.
Milton, another question. In my experience, clients are more and more closed in providing personal data, in particular, profiling. Even if in the store, people are so kind and committed, what's the general feeling in the luxury industry in particular?
I think there are several points of view, and I will credit my friend Matteo Atti, who is the executive VP of VistaJet, with sharing some insights into this. So he said, look, we collect data from very wealthy people and we do it, we put it into our profile, our database, but we do it face to face. What are your preferences? What are your destinations? Maybe they have an assistant who's providing that data. But if you own a private jet card or a private jet contract, you are giving a tremendous amount of data to the company because that's the only way they can serve you. I think, and that's the equation. I will provide data so that you can serve me. And if you're not serving me, then you don't need to have that data, either because you're incompetent or because you're unaware or because you're just not doing the job right. But if I know that every amount of data that I give you, even if I'm the wealthiest person in the world, is going to serve me, and I know that I can trust you because you put in the legal and technological frameworks to deliver that, then I will share that data. The second point is that consumers are willing to share data if they trust. And however, I will say this, raw data is not the end game. Raw data is the beginning, but you saw that Instagram does a lot of analysis and creates a lot of metadata. Brands need to do that too. So in the future, I may not want you to have every single step that I took during my day, but I will share that I went to certain stores and certain locations so you can understand my taste. So I think there will be an evolution where the sharing of data will be more about the sharing of critical, actionable insight. And this is only the beginning. And we're working on mechanisms so that we will share only, let's call it the metadata or the critical insight. Consumers will keep their data safe, but they will share key insights so that the synthesis, the distillation, the analysis, the sorting out, the mining of the critical nuggets of data will be what's important and for consumers and for brands, and we will get to that place. So that's how I think the affluent and luxury will operate. You're not going to have all my data. You're going to have the key insights that help you in your category to give me the personalization that I need. Any other questions?
There's a couple of other statements that I think it's important that we focus on it as well, because it does have to do with the scraping of data.
Yes.
So it states that the problem with giving people our data or our email is that they start sending marketing emails every day, and it's entirely way too much and becomes a nuisance. Most of the time, I didn't even share my email with them. When companies only send us what they think we want to see because we clicked on something else, they limit us to what we can see on Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera. So I think it's, Milton, take it away. I think this is a great point to talk about scrape data versus what the consumer is giving.
That's a lot of great points in one statement. So I don't know I'll be able to address all of them. Let me take a few. Scraping data should be illegal and will likely become illegal in the next year or two, period. You and I did not give anyone consent to scrape our data, period. Okay, even our comments on LinkedIn or Instagram, whatever, no. Okay, so that's clear. Now, second, because a company has our data by our consent does not mean that that company can spam us. We worked with a lot of brands over the last 18 years in luxury, and we always said, why don't you stop spamming your consumers? Ask them for consent, ask them what channel, let them determine what communications you will have with them. And by the way, once they trust you, they will open up. And they will certainly open up with a sales associate that they trust. So you're absolutely right. When data is co-opted without my consent, third parties, the Department of Motor Vehicles is selling my car information, forget it. I want that stopped. When I say full control, I want full control. But as I said, when we put regulations in, when we put seatbelts in, they did not prevent us from driving faster or longer or to far greater destinations. Every time you put a good rule or a good regulation or a good common sense policy in place, it opens up the system. That's one thing that brands don't seem to understand. And they're guided by third-party companies and data companies that don't have the brand's best interests. When you are trustworthy, worthy of trust, and not just on say so, but you can prove it, your customers will open up. That's the paradox of personal data. I hope I answered at least some of the key points there. What's the next statement, please, Katie?
Sure. So it says everything you're saying is absolutely correct. Perhaps the most effective way of operating the win-win change would be to establish the first service to a niche luxury industry, which also can be branded as superlative VIP service.
Yes. Now it's interesting because a lot of concierge companies are going under. So, and I would have thought that those companies would have had great insights into clients and would be able to serve their clients better than really any one brand because I'm your concierge. But somehow those companies have not survived. So, what I would say is that again, the the access to data is critical for brands, but the only place to get it where you have authenticated, verified, by consent, for fair value exchange is directly from your customer. So brands are going to have to, whether it's a DataLucent or some other methodology. I know that they're doing surveys. There's something called zero-party data, and they're doing surveys. They're trying to reach out. Retention is the new black. You can quote me on that because a lot of companies don't have much data. And let's say wines and spirits company may have no data, sadly. And yet, so they have to rely on surveys and other means. This opens up a far greater way to develop a relationship with the consumer. But again, it has to be under the consumer's control. And I think that's the key. It's going to be the case with medical data. How fair is it that 23andMe, you pay them to give you an ancestry profile, and they go out and make billions of dollars on your data just because they coerced you into a license agreement that's perpetual? I don't think that's cool. That's not cool. That's not okay. And there will be exchanges created for your genetic data, your medical data, that will give you control. Not your doctor, as well-intentioned as your doctor is, not pharma, as well-intentioned as they are, but you as a consumer. And you will love it. And yes, you will not, some people say, well, you'll be burdened. My God, that's such a burden to manage that. No, you'll be aided. There will be a whole ecosystem of companies that will be advocating for you, educating you, and giving you the best advice and the best mechanisms to automate your personal data sharing. DataLucent is the one that's on the ground now, but in the next 100 years, there will be a rich ecosystem we cannot even imagine. Any other questions? I welcome any comments that you might have, and offline or online, please send us information. I was very skeptical when I found out that there could be a personal data economy a few years ago. I became very passionate, and I think the way to end this is to say, you believe in sustainability. We didn't believe as much as brands, but now we do. We're all in. We believe in inclusivity and fair opportunity. We hemmed and hawed about it, but now I think I can say most of us are all in. And by the way, we're not leaving anybody behind, okay? Of any color, any race. Nobody's being left behind. This is not, let's do to them what they did to us. This is, let's go forward and everybody have a chance. I believe that personal data rights, personal data dignity is equally important as an issue for society in the next decade and the next century. And I'll end with that, and I'll say thank you for being gracious and listening to my dialogue. And I hope we can exchange more dialogue in the future, because nobody knows what the future will hold, but we can help create the future. And that's what I hope we're doing with DataLucent. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.